Today's speakers are Linda Hughes and Shilpa Ramachandra. Linda is a principal software engineer with Certara. She has worked in software development for the pharmaceutical industry for 18 years. At Certara, she has worked on developing tools for non-compartmental analysis, bioequivalence, nonlinear mixed effects modeling, descriptive statistics, IVIVC, convolution, and deconvolution. She holds a master's degree in electrical engineering and a bachelor's degree in math, both from the University of Maryland. Shilpa Ramachandra is an engineering lead in Certara's software division. She has over 20 years of IT experience, including application development and web development. Ms. Ramachandra holds a bachelor's degree in math and a graduate degree in computer science. Linda and Shilpa, welcome to today's event. I'll now turn it over to Linda to begin the presentation.
Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you to our attendees for joining us today. Shilpa and I are very pleased that we have this opportunity today to show you some of the new features and improvements for Phoenix 7.0 that we, as developers, have worked on for the release. Today's webinar will focus on 3 key areas. First of all, one of the most frequent requests that we receive from users for Phoenix is for improvement in the plots of Phoenix. We've responded to your request, and we'll have time today to show not only some new features that are available for plots, but we'll also show some improvements in the appearance of plots, and we'll show some improvements in the usability of the plotting user interface. The second area that we're going to talk about today is implementation of parallel processing in the NCA tool. We'll show you some benchmarks for the speed improvements that you can expect to see in Phoenix 7.0 if you're a WinNonlin user and you're running large NCA studies. The third area we're going to present is about improved memory usage in Phoenix 7.0, which can yield up to a 90% reduction in memory utilization due to a new data layer in Phoenix 7.0. This will benefit all Phoenix users no matter which products you use. So we're going to start with the question, what is Phoenix? As most of you know, Phoenix refers to the platform or framework on which our products are built. And the products that are available for the Phoenix platform are WinNonlin, Connect, NLME, and the IVIVC and Autopilot toolkits. When you install Phoenix, you install all of the products, and your license determines which products you are able to use. A specific version of Phoenix refers to the platform version number and also to the specific collection of individual product versions. So I want to start and explain the change in version numbering that took place for Phoenix 7.0. When the Phoenix platform was first introduced, the platform was introduced as version 1.0, but the WinNonlin product and the toolkits already existed. So those existing version numbers were incremented. For example, WinNonlin was in version 5.3 prior to Phoenix. So that was incremented to version 6.0 for the first release on the Phoenix platform. We had a Connect in the first release and then NLME in the version after that. So by Phoenix 1.4, we had a conglomeration of different version numbers as shown in the screenshot on the left. And this was very confusing for our users. In addition, the WinNonlin validation suite that went with WinNonlin 6.4 was version 4.0, so that threw another number in there because the validation suite also had releases prior to Phoenix. So for the latest release, we took the highest number, which is 6.4, and incremented it to 7.0, and that made all the version numbers the same. Even the WinNonlin validation suite is now versioned as 7.0, so it's much easier to keep track of now. An important note I want to make is that Phoenix 7.0 is now certified for use on Windows 10. It was done as a post-release certification, so the user manuals that you install will say that Windows 7 and Windows 8.1 are supported. But you can go to our support site and you can get the product notification about a certification for Windows 10, or you can also just email our sales or support group for more information, and Suzanne will provide the contact information at the end of the webinar. For those interested in the validation suite for WinNonlin, it has already been released for all platforms supported by Phoenix 7.0 except Windows 10, and our Windows 10 version will be released very shortly. So now we'll get into the plotting enhancements in more detail, and the plotting enhancements fall into 3 areas. So I'm going to start with an overview of those 3 areas, and then we'll get into more detail. So first of all, we're going to cover new features that are in the plots, and we're going to talk about new options for the placement of the legend on the plot. We're going to talk about error bars for XY X-Categorical plots. We'll talk about a new option for offsetting an overlaid plot, the ability to modify some of the default settings in Phoenix, like fonts and layout, and we'll talk about plot shading on one specific NLME plot. Now, for improvements in plot appearance, we have better resolution of the plots, and that applies both for your screen display and also for some of the copy and export options, and I'll show some examples of the improved resolution. We have new defaults for the font styles and font sizes and some of the layout options. We've improved the layout and spacing on the lattice plots. I'll show an example of that. And we've improved the appearance of histograms due to improvements both in the methodology and on the display of histograms. And then the third area we'll talk about is improvements in the usability of the plot user interface. We've redesigned and made more accessible all the lattice options. The layout options are more accessible and more intuitive. We've redesigned the reference line, the axis labels, and the plot export user interface. And we've made the export option available directly from the right-click menu. Okay, so now we're getting to the plotting enhancements in more detail, and we'll start with the legend location. So here I'm showing Phoenix 1.4. And in Phoenix 1.4, you have 4 options for the docking position of the legend: top, right, bottom, and left. So in my example, I've chosen right from the drop-down menu, and the legend is off to the right of the plot, but note that it is far to the right and outside of the chart area. In Phoenix 7.0, we added a checkbox for inside chart area, which can be applied to any of the top, right, bottom, or left options. So here you can see the inside chart area checkbox, and in my example I have the drop-down selected to top, which would normally place the legend up above the plot. But by just checking the inside chart area box, it moves the legend down inside the chart area. So it's a very quick and easy way to bring your legend closer to the plot. Now, if you need even more flexibility on the placement of the legend, we have another new option called absolute position. When you check the radio button for absolute position, you can set the X offset or Y offset of the legend. So that moves the legend to the left or the right or up and down. And you can also set the width and the height of the box that contains the legend. You just use these spinner buttons to change these numbers, and as you do it, the legend will move around real time. So you just move it around until you're happy with position, and then you're done. It's a very easy to use interface. It's a nice new feature that we're very happy about, so we hope you enjoy using it. So now for error bars for XY X-Categorical plots. We had this feature previously for XY plots. We kept all the same options and the same UI as for error bars for XY plots. So if you're familiar with this feature, it will be very easy to use on the X-Categorical plots. And we've also provided an example project that shows how you can construct the plot that I've shown. It's the multiple profiles project, and also all the steps are given in the WinNonlin user's guide. So in this example, I've plotted mean against form. So mean is the triangles in the plot, and form is capsule and tablet. And I've used the standard deviations for the length of the error bars. Now when you look at this plot, you're probably thinking to yourself that you'd like to be able to move those error bars over a little bit. And that's going to segue into our next slide, which is an offset option on an overlay plot. So now, in Phoenix 7.0, you can offset the second plot in an overlay graph. And this is available for overlay XY plots or overlay XY X-Categorical plots. you select the second plot underneath graphs, and on the Content tab, you'll now have an option for offset, and it's controlled by the number of pixels. Now, you may not be sure what the number of pixels you want is, but again, this is a live update, so you just change the number until you get a nice appearance. The next new feature is the ability to set the default fonts and layouts, and you can change the defaults that Phoenix uses for plots to your company's standard. So if you have a standard that you need to use for reports or publications, you're now able to set those in a plotting configuration file. The options that can be set are the font styles and font sizes, and those can be set separately for each of the areas of these areas of the plot titles, lattice titles, axis labels, tick labels, and legends. You're also able to set the layout options such as panel height and width and chart spacing. Now, all the detailed steps of editing your plotting configuration file are in the user's guide. But I'll just point out here that what you need to do is we first suggest you make a backup copy because you may want to return to the Phoenix default settings later on. You modify the settings in any text editor such as Notepad and save. You'll need to be an administrator on your computer to do that save. And then you restart Phoenix for the changes to take effect. This will apply to the output of any plotting object, but it also applies to the plots created from other operational objects such as NCA. It will not override any user-specified settings that you've already saved for plots in your projects. And I want to also note here that we changed the default font in Phoenix 7.0 from Tahoma to Seago, which is a widely used and popular font. And also the default font size in 7.0 are all larger than the default font sizes in 1.4. So you may be happy with our new defaults as it is, but you now have this option to change them if you want. And I also want to make a point here too, that remember that default templates can be used to set the default settings, and that's per type of operational object. It's not a new feature. It's been in since Phoenix 1.3, but we find that a lot of our users don't know about it, and it's a very powerful feature. So if you haven't tried default templates, you can look that up in our user's guide and give that a try. And the last new feature that we're going to talk about is the shading of the visual predictive check plot. This only affects NLME users. The shading will be included by default. This is a plot of secondary quantiles, and in Phoenix 1.4 on the left, it's a little hard to figure out which lines go which line to determine the quantiles. But with the shading in Phoenix 7.0, it's easy to see the outlines of the secondary quantiles. So now we're going to move on to plot appearance and how we've improved the resolution of the plots. And I'm going to give a few different examples. So this is an example of exporting a plot in EMF format at 600 dpi. I've done the same thing in Phoenix 1.4 and in 7.0, and here I'm showing them side by side. So one of the things that you'll notice is that in Phoenix 1.4, the individual features of the plot, such as the tick labels and axis label, they decrease in size as the DPI is made larger, and you'll also notice that the resolution is a bit pixelated. In Phoenix 7.0, the features retain their relative size, and also the crispness of the plot is much better. So if you're exporting a plot to use in a publication or report, you're going to get a nicer quality plot. Another example of the improvement in resolution is in Word export, where we've increased the exported plots from 96 dpi to 300 dpi, and that always occurs. You don't need to do anything to get that benefit. Another example is using the right-click vector-based copy option. And in this example that I'm showing in the screenshot, I pasted that copy into Word, and I viewed it at 500%. And you can see, again, the pixelation in Phoenix 1.4, but the plot is very sharp in Phoenix 7.0. So if you need to increase the size of a plot to use on a poster publication, you're going to you're going to have a nice quality even at a very large size. And this was very easy to do. It's just right-click, copy, paste, and you have your plot. Now we're going to talk about some improvements we've made in latticing. In Phoenix 1.4, first of all, blank plots were left in the lattice by default. And we also had some issues with spacing in the plot, that you sometimes could get an overlap between an axis label and the title of the plot below that. Now in Phoenix 7.0, Phoenix 7.0 defaults to the blank plots being removed. If you prefer to see all subjects, then you just uncheck the collapse sparse latticing option and you can bring all subjects back in. But the default is for the blank plots to be removed. Also, the spacing is improved so that there's no overlap of labels. And actually, with the way this feature is re-architected, it's impossible to get an overlap of those labels now in the lattice plots. Okay, and the last area we're going to talk about in plot appearance is the improvement in the histograms. The data labels for histograms in Phoenix 1.4 contain both the X value and the frequency, whereas usually for histograms what you are interested in is the frequency. So now in Phoenix 7.0 we show just the frequency above the bars. The default for the X-axis tick label, number of significant digits, changed from 4 to 3 to avoid wrapping of the labels. Now, it's not impossible to get wrapping in Phoenix 7.0 if you have a lot of data points and a lot of bars in your histogram, but it should happen less often. We also increased the default panel width for histograms to also help avoid that wrapping of the labels. And also the number of bins algorithm was changed to get a better visualization of the frequency distribution when the number of observations is large. In this particular example that I have, it has the same number of bins. But if you're an NLE user, you know that some of the histograms in the output had a large number of skinny bins, and if you get too many bins, you don't get a good visualization of your frequency distribution. Now we're going to move into improvements in the usability of the user interface. In Phoenix 1.4, to find the latticing options, you needed to know to select plot in the plot tree, and then some of the options were on the content tab and some of the options were on the appearance tab. I always found that I was always searching for these options because I didn't remember to look at plot in the plot tree. So now in Phoenix 7.0, we have a lattice option directly in the plot tree with all your lattice options combined here. Now this does not include spacing of latticing because spacing is considered a layout option. And that brings us to our next slide. We put layout right into the plot tree also. We've moved the fit image to screen option here. This was also one that I always had a really hard time finding. And also, we've improved how the fit image to screen option works. It used to distort the plot a bit and cause some fuzziness in the plot. The plot now retains its sharpness and it scales better, so the fit image to screen works better. We renamed decoration area size to tick label area size to give a better indication of what that spacing is for. We've added lattice title offset. And we decreased the defaults on chart spacing and outer margin to give a better improvement on the spacing of the plot. You can always change these options to make them larger if you want. Another area where we improved the usability of the interface is in reference line. In Phoenix 1.4, the ordering was a bit non-intuitive. You had to start in the middle of the UI, set your line scale, click the Add button, and then go back up to set the options that you wanted for the line. The list of lines was a numbered list, and so not very intuitive to show what lines they referred to. So this UI has been redesigned for Phoenix 7.0, and it works from top to bottom, and we've also added a table that keeps track of your reference lines. So here I've selected Y from the drop-down for axis, I go to the next option, and I set the value that I want to use for the reference line. I can add a title if I want to, that's optional. I can add a color if I want to, also optional. I can change the style if I want, or change the line weight if I want. And when I get the line set up the way I want, I push the Add button. And you can see that the line shows up in the plot, and the line also shows up in the reference line table, which showing all the features of that line. Now suppose I went through the process again and I added a second line. So now I have two lines in my table of reference lines, and I have the two reference lines showing up in the plot. So this might define something like a therapeutic window for a time concentration plot. If you want to change any of the options after you've set up your reference line, you select the line in this table of reference lines. All the options for that line will show up on the right-hand side. You can modify any of those options, and when you click the Update button, then the line will be updated in the plot. So hopefully much easier to use and more intuitive. Another area where we improve the user interface is in the axis labels. In Phoenix 1.4, the axis labels were options were some were on the Appearance tab and some were on the Label tab. And furthermore, on the Label tab, there were two places to enter the label depending on whether you were using plain text or rich text format. In Phoenix 7.0, the axis label options are all in one place in the UI. It's always rich text, and also it updates live real time, whereas in Phoenix 1.4, a re-execution was required for a rich text format label. We added a right-click option to easily export slots, so their export is now in with the copy options. And we also improved the export dialog. In Phoenix 1.4, you had to go through two dialogs, one to set your file name and then one for your settings. So now this is combined into one dialog, and also the dialog remains the same no matter what type of file type you're using for your plot. So that brings us to the end of the plotting improvements. We hope that you enjoy using them. We'd love to get your feedback. Feel free to contact us through support, and we in development always love to hear from you. I'm now going to turn the presentation over to Shilpa Ramachandra, who's going to discuss parallel execution of NCA and the memory improvements.
Hello, everyone. For the parallel execution of NCA, our industry standard WinNonlin engine has been redesigned to conduct non-compartmental analysis twice as fast as our previous versions, cutting the analysis time in half. This is a huge benefit for WinNonlin users that have large studies that they use to perform analysis on, clinical or preclinical. In Phoenix 1.4, each PK profile was evaluated in a sequential fashion. For a study with 400 subjects, 5 analyzed, 4 days, there were a total of 8,000 PK profiles, and running it in Phoenix 1.4 took 6 minutes and 40 seconds for computation. In Phoenix 7.0, we take advantage of the multiple cores on the local computer to run all the subjects in parallel. Using this example, we were able to reduce the analysis time by almost 50%. This is a unique time saving for our customer and will be most evident in large NCA projects with many subjects and analytes. Users can test it after installing Phoenix 7.0. And I want to mainly specify that there is no change in how users set up and execute a non-compartmental analysis. Phoenix automatically detects the presence of multiple processors and then parallelizes the analysis to literally cut the analysis time in half. The next is the new data layer for improved user experience. In Phoenix 7.0, implements a new data layer that compared to the previous version delivers a 90% reduction in memory utilization. This benefits all Phoenix users and gives a much more stable application that does not crash with large data sets due to high memory utilization. Phoenix 1.4 uses a memory-only approach for handling data. This resulted in fast operation with small data sets. But with large data sets, users found that Phoenix could slow down, and we had reports of crashes due to out-of-memory errors. So we implemented the new data layer into Phoenix 7.0 that uses a mixture of memory and hard drive to improve the user experience. We cache a small portion of the data set in memory and read the rest from disk on demand. Users will see memory usage reductions by approximately 90%. This will lead to increased stability on large projects and data sets and nearly a complete elimination of application crashes due to out-of-memory issues. To take advantage of this increased stability, make sure you're using the recommended hardware for optimal performance. This includes an Intel i7 processor and a solid-state hard drive, aka SSD.
Thanks, Shilpa. Now you can see why we're excited about the new features and functionality in Phoenix 7.0. Each of these was designed based on your feedback and focused on making the Phoenix software workbench the most efficient tool available for pharmacokineticists and pharmacometricians. We've added the power of parallel execution for NCA. We've increased efficiency with publication quality plots and figures and improved performance. We believe that more power and efficiency is what drives value for users, allowing you to get more work done in less time with less effort. We look forward to the amazing medicines that you will develop using Phoenix 7.0. We'd also like to point out to all of our attendees that we've announced a new on-demand course from Certara University, What's New in Phoenix WinNonlin 7.0. This course is free to attendees who have taken or take the Intro to Phoenix WinNonlin or the Intro to Population Modeling using Phoenix NLME. We also encourage you to visit the Certara forum to discuss model building and other Phoenix questions with Certara moderators and other users. The next webinar in the series will take place on December 14th, when Drs. Mike Dunleavy, Serge Guzzi, and Xiuhua Hu will explain how to model delayed outcomes in PK studies using delay differential equations. You can register for all webinars in the series by visiting certara.com/webinars. We've also provided a list of ways to contact Certara about all of our products and services. Now we'll move into the Q&A portion of the webinar. We encourage you to submit your questions to Linda and Shilpa through the Q&A panel. We've got our first question from our audience. Can a project shared in Phoenix 7.0 be shared with a colleague who has Phoenix WinNonlin 6.4?
Okay, no, it's not the case. So Phoenix 7.0 is backwardly compatible. Phoenix 7.0 will open projects from any prior Phoenix version, but none of the Phoenix versions have been forwardly compatible. So due to ongoing improvements that we're making in Phoenix, it's very difficult to predict what will happen in the future, and so Phoenix 7.0 projects might not load in earlier versions. We would have to anticipate that when we're writing Phoenix 6.4.
Someone else would like to know, how do I know which version of Phoenix am I running?
So that can be seen on the splash screen at startup. It also shows in the About Phoenix box in the Help menu. If you're in a project, the Information tab shows the version that was used to create the project. It also shows the version that the project was last saved in, and also shows the version that the project was last executed in. We also have a new feature in the settings output and the core output. These now contain the Phoenix version number.
Is there any way to save these files such that they can be shared?
No, you cannot save a Phoenix 7.0 project in a way to share it with somebody with 6.4. The person who has 6.4 can create the project, and then that could be loaded in 7.0, but not the other way around.
Do the plotting improvements benefit all Phoenix products?
If you're a WinNonlin user, an NLME user, or an IBIBC user, then you'll benefit from the plotting improvements. The Autopilot toolkit uses Sigma plot to create plots, so there's no changes to the plots in Autopilot. In Connect, primarily Connect uses the data tools such as SAS and R to create plots. There are a few plots in the non-mem tool that are created by Phoenix, so those would benefit. But primarily it's WinNonlin, NLME, and IVIEC.
Is there the ability to just click on a component of a plot, such as an axis, the curve, so that it opens up the options to edit it in the bottom panel?
Yes, that's true. It is true for most of the features in the plot. Axis, curve, legend, it does go to the correct spot in the bottom panel.
Is the parallel processing in NCA automatic, or do I need to set it up?
No, Phoenix will determine how many processors that you have, and it will parallelize the runs automatically. There's no setup required to benefit from the parallel processing in NCA.
Does my computer need to have an Intel Core i7 SSD to run Phoenix 7.0?
No, it's not required to run 7.0, but that is the recommended hardware. It's recommended that you have an SSD to really benefit from the memory improvements that were made in Phoenix 7.0.
This looks to be all the questions from our audience. Thanks, Linda and Shilpa. This concludes the webinar. On behalf of Certara, I would like to thank you for attending today's presentation. Goodbye and have a great day.